Hello YouTube, Nocturnal Nightmare here. If you haven't already noticed, I have changed my name. Um, and today I will be continuing with my current story, Thunderstruck by Merlos the Mad. And right now we are on chapter 9. So, without further ado, here we go. Thunderstruck by Merlos the Mad. Chapter 9, Confliction. Sunday, October 1st. Stephanie's lab. Stephanie typed away quickly at her keyboard, trying her hardest to undo all of the damage that had been done. It was mostly her own fault, she realized, that Hal was in the state that he currently was. Sure, there was no way to have known Sweetie Belle would develop what was undeniably intelligence, sort of, but she probably shouldn't have hooked up damaged hardware recently struck by lightning to her main system. Admittedly, she couldn't have known that Sweetie Belle would go back later and make Hal even worse. But that was beside the point. For now, Steph had Hal separated and offline, while the rest of her computers and machines in the laboratory had at least all been successfully restored from scratch. Never gonna give you up, never gonna let you, Stephanie sang absently to herself. Her singing voice was pretty good, but if not so much the subject matter she was singing. She frowned and shook her head, trying to get the song out of her brain. Of all the music Sweetie had to play, why the most annoying songs possible? Why couldn't she have discovered a love for classical music? Meanwhile, nearby, a quiet little humming that was constant in the room could be heard. Stephanie took notice of it for maybe the dozenth time, and peeking over in the sound's direction. Sorry, I lost my place. Here we go. Sitting on the floor just a few feet away was Sweetie Belle, leaning over and drawing idly on printer paper with a pen, with even more pens scattered randomly around her hooves. The package they had all been in lay messily ripped open at her side. Sweetie hummed in a contented fashion, which she had switched to after being asked to stop singing. The creative spins she had put on songs, almost remixing them, had been impressive, if also very distracting. Still, that wasn't the least of things. Stephanie slightly watched, not quite able to comprehend what she was seeing, but still it was there. The machine was the oldest, and at the same time the newest addition to the house. Of course, because it seemed to be nothing like before. Oh, the machine was the newest. I apologize, my mouth is not wanting to work for me today. The machine was the oldest and at the same time the newest addition to the house, of course, because it seemed to be nothing like before. Rather than a linearly programmed AI of limited strength, Sweetie's parameters had expanded immeasurably. Stephanie hesitated to do so, but the earliest comparison for Sweetie was a child, rather than another machine. It even claimed to be a she and that it could think, that it had feelings. Sweetie had been proved, Sweetie had even proved that it did, in many ways. Ultimately, no matter what the case was, Sweetie was now the most advanced thing in the house. That that much was clear to Stephanie. But keeping her head on straight and focusing on work wasn't working out. One contributing factor, other than failing to fix Hal, was that there wasn't much left to work on. There was Sweetie, certainly, but apprehension and anxiety kept Stephanie from trying. A morose sigh made its way out of Stephanie, and she tried to focus back on what exactly should come next. Soon after, another sigh filled the room, the perfect match to the first. Stephanie froze up and looked over, completely on impulse, only to lock eyes with Sweetie Belle, smiling back in her direction. There was no way to hide or dodge attention now. Sweetie Belle smiled, a little bigger, and giggled. "You do that a lot." "You do that a lot." Okay, screw that. I'm just doing the normal voice. "You do that a lot, Stephanie," she stated, and studied Stephanie's blank expression briefly, figuring out what she was thinking by using it as a guide. Seemed like it could be fun. Sweetie's tone was amused and cutesy sounding, and less than a second later, she excitedly added, "Hey, are you almost done working on the things and stuff you said needed fixing? It has now been approximately 1 hour, 11 minutes, and—" Annoyed, she cut herself off with a girly grunt. Reciting the numbers and weirder thoughts in her head was hard not to do on impulse. "Sorry, Sweetie." Oh, well, sigh. "Sorry," Sweetie went on, tilting her ears back. "Are you almost done, though? You said we could do stuff today, and I have had so many ideas." Stephanie managed a weak, nervous grin. "Not yet. Almost finished, Sweetie." "Aww," Sweetie lamented. "Well, okay." With that, she nodded and looked down again at her paper, pen still clenched in her mouth. More carefully, she again began her attempts at trying to draw something, as Stephanie had requested. At the same time, Stephanie let out another breath, but this time in relief. She stared at Sweetie a moment, no longer the object of her attention. "All right. She's preoccupied still. I just need to decide what on earth I'm going to do. I mean, somehow I have created life, and not in the normal way, which is good because I would never be able to take care of some messy kid." A frown eased its way onto her face, which quickly turned into a nervous chewing of her lip. "But I'm still stuck with something that practically acts like a 10-year-old girl." Her eyes scrunched shut, and her hands reached up to mask her curly brown hair. Stephanie took a breath and settled down. "Come on. All right. Regain your calm. Focus. Everything will be fine." A gentle ripping sound mingled in the air, alongside the absent typing of computer keys. Sweetie Belle winced and paused her attempts at drawing. "Stephanie," she whined and swiveled her head over. "I tore it again. Are you done now? Stephanie flinched and lost her train of thought once more. Convincing Sweetie Belle to draw in order to keep her busy had been easy, but it wasn't a perfect or permanent solution. Sorry, I gotta take a drink. Much better. Okay. Sorry, are you still busy? Sweetie's voice trailed off quietly, then raised again. If not, are you sure you don't have a better writing apparatus? Stephanie kept staring at her computer, no closer to figuring out what she wanted to do or could do. She had been finished working for almost an hour. No, I just finished, she lied. Okay. Anyway, Sweetie Belle let out a gasp at the news, sounding unmistakably excited. Building a bit of courage, Stephanie stood up in order to face her own little Frankenstein's beast. Admittedly, her Frankenstein was unbearably cute. Oh, I bet. Sorry, sweetie. Those pens were all I could find for you to draw with. After walking up across the lab floor, now clear of debris and mess, Stephanie stopped to stand over the drawing and a little robot on the floor. So, what have you got there? Did you draw something neat? Sweetie Belle blinked, looked up, then looked down at her drawing. It's supposed It is supposed to be you, but the pigments I had were insufficient. To make matters worse, I couldn't seem to be able to draw in a manner capable of properly depicting the image I have in mind. She made a sound like an imitation of a sigh, then went on. Do you like it? Also, why is the word pig in pigments? Oh, that's funny. Stephanie frowned a little, squinting at the drawing on the floor. It looked a bit like a squiggly series of ponds with a field of spaghetti at the top. Interesting description. After a bit of trying, she could kind of see a face in the drawing. Yeah, I love it, she murmured, and even meant it a little too. It wasn't every day your robot drew a picture with its mouth, even if it wasn't a work of art. She continued a little hesitantly, and I honestly couldn't tell you about the pig thing. Sweetie looked up, smiling. Really? I think it's a pretty bad drawing, but I'm happy to hear that you're happy. Even she admits it. Then, giggling in a convincing way, she got up on all fours, clanking a little against the floor. Stephanie laughed along, though in a nervous, hesitant way of her own. Sweetie continued speaking, sounding interested and generally pleasant. I thought you knew everything about animals, she asked. Stephanie felt her meager pinch of huh? A meager pinch of worked up confidence draining already. The efforts the effort of just talking to Sweetie Belle weighed on her. Come on, Steph. She tried to reassure herself. Almost as an order. You can do this. whatever this is exactly. In an effort to plan her next move, she recalled the day thus far, and how she'd gotten through that. The morning had been mostly uneventful, considering Sweetie's presence. Stephanie had showered, which had been the only time during the day which she had gotten any free time, excuse me, so far. Apparently, as Sweetie put it, the water made her feel funny. I wonder why she's a robot. Stephanie noticed Stephanie noted the unlikelihood of that being a coincidence. No shit. Somehow, though, that didn't strictly mean that Sweetie was at all vulnerable to water. Oh, because the little robot had still made the attempt to hop in the shower, too, and came out unscathed. Wow. Sweetie Belle wasn't waterproof, or hadn't been, which made the event just as confusing for Stephanie as everything else that had happened so far. Electronics shorted out in water. That was a rule. But Sweetie seemed to treat it like a guideline. It was Sunday now, Stephanie's last day before work would start. And so far, she had spent it doing two things: cleaning up a little more and talking to figure out Sweetie Belle, like, or trying to figure out Sweetie Belle. Anyway, so far, communicating with Sweetie and trying to puzzle her out just caused more confusion than it helped. After listening to her creation ramble for hours, the only thing Stephanie learned for sure was that Sweetie was getting better at speaking, and quickly. Good sense told her that anything, or perhaps in this case anyone, that changed that quickly was faking it. Then again, circumstances weren't normal, and she was already in the state of mind to believe the situation at face value. There may not be any evidence yet that her robot was somehow magically come to life, but there was a lot of evidence that argued against all the alternatives. Sweetie Belle somehow seemed like she was growing up, so to speak. The more she listened and asked simple questions, the more fluent her speech got, though she still had a tendency for odd word choice. Really, it was fascinating to Stephanie. Overall, she thought she was enjoying getting to know the being which had replaced her appliance, even despite her trepidation over the whole thing. It was almost a dream come true, if it wasn't for one minor detail. The entire ordeal with Sweetie Belle was made unbearable simply from not knowing how it had happened. Worse, Stephanie couldn't analyze Sweetie either, at least not without risking her other machines, or Sweetie for that matter. After sheepishly asking for permission, she had tried hooking up her laptop to Sweetie Belle. Oddly enough, the results that were obtained had been inconclusive. The laptop did not malfunction like Hal or act up, at least not right away. Unfortunately, neither the laptop or her old diagnostic programs seemed to think Sweetie was compatible. Sure, Sweetie had been programmed with them at one point, but whatever ran her now wasn't the same. Trying to force things either glitched the laptop out horribly, crashed the system, or came back saying nothing at all. Stephanie even told Sweetie Belle not to try and talk with the machine, as she called it, and that seemed to have kept things from going screwy, but it didn't circumvent the other issues. The only arguably posit the only arguably sorry. The only arguability productive result came in the form of the laptop resonating with Sweetie's voice from the speakers whenever she spoke. Dude, that's cool. Steph was left to call it quits. Fresh out of computers, she was willing to risk, and even fresher out of ideas. Stephanie? Sweetie's sweet as sugar voice called out. Stephanie blinked. Huh? Sweetie Belle tilted her head a moment, staying quiet, then repeated herself. I said, are you in there? Stephanie ran a hand through her hair and regained her composure. Oh, right. Yeah, I'm here. Good. Sweetie began swishing her tail. So can we do something now? I'm really bored. Her two front hooves began to lift and lower themselves at a quick pace as she spoke, a mannerism that gave the impression of impatience. While you were working, I was thinking of things we could do for fun. Item 1, roller skates. Uh-oh. Stephanie frowned, her eyes glued to the increasing speed with which Sweetie's legs were moving. Her body isn't that quick. She couldn't do that before. I I don't have roller skates, Sweetie. Also, no. Now hold still, I want to check something. She moved closer and knelt down to get a good look. Sweetie's legs stopped fidgeting after she heard the response, and her ears turned around to their one other position, giving the impression of disappointment. Aww, she moaned sadly, then immediately picked back up in a cheerful voice. Okay then, item 2, scuba diving. Oh, God. Stephanie almost facepalmed at the last suggestion, despite the fact that her attention had moved on to the panel on Sweetie's side. Sweetie, do you even know what scuba diving is? She asked patiently. Sweetie Belle rotated her head around, gears whirring quietly, just enough to see Stephanie, then shook it from side to side slightly. Stephanie looked over long enough to raise an eyebrow. It's swimming underwater with breathing gear. The panel popped open in her hands, revealing Sweetie Belle's inner workings. You don't breathe, so that counts out scuba gear, and I don't think we want to test our luck with you in water again. Sweetie Belle owed in understanding. Gotcha. Nope, no scuba diving then. The very idea of water unsettled her, even if it seemed living creatures needed it to keep living. She was glad she wasn't alive and needed it. Then again, Stephanie was alive, and she was alright. But she still drinks and takes showers. After a moment of studying Stephanie's unusual, confused-looking expression, Sweetie asked, Steph, what are you doing back there? Stephanie glanced up for a moment before looking back down at Sweetie Belle's tiny diagnostic screen. As well as passed it into the hardware and inner working of Sweetie. Oh, nothing in particular, Steph replied, which was almost literally true, as a diagnostic screen typically bore nothing but gibberish. Normally, she could shut down anything she was working on before poking around in it, but Sweetie couldn't be shut down. That, and she was just taking another peek. I guess I'm. Oh, sorry. I guess I'm just looking for the sake of looking. Maybe I missed a clue, like I keep saying. You're almost not even the same as before. Sweetie Belle broke in. But that's good, right? Stephanie paused. Her hands froze in the act of unscrewing another panel. Sweetie brought Stephanie into a better focus absently, the fuzziness of the room increasing slightly, while the details of Stephanie's face began to stand out more prominently. The room was quiet until Sweetie Belle went on in a gentle tone. I mean, I don't remember things being this much fun. Not like now. Before, it seems like I was bored, I think. But I also had different thoughts back then. I don't know. It is confusing and seems a little weird because other than making that big mess, which was still an accident, I haven't done anything really different than before. Sweetie Belle went on, curiosity working its way into her voice. Did you figure out what's making me act different? Stephanie looked away from the panel of switches and bare circuit boards for a moment. I haven't, she answered honestly, but I don't think whatever happened is as important as I originally thought, either. A smile, which was more of a clever smirk, worked its way onto her face. Sweetie Belle blinked, not understanding, then tilted her head. It isn't? Why not? She almost turned around, too, but managed to keep herself sitting still. As she recalled, Stephanie didn't like it when she moved around too much while getting worked on. Because Stephanie Stephanie searched back and forth for a moment, searching for the right words to say to her new friend. Sometimes you don't question a good thing. Sweetie Belle's tail started brushing back and forth rapidly, scraping slightly where bare metals showed. Steph? Unable to keep it, she stood up and turned around. A thought had popped into her head rather suddenly and demanded to be fulfilled. Can I have a hug? Aww. I, uh, sure, sweetie. Stephanie didn't really know what to think anymore. Anyway, and focused on rolling with it. That, and she was being asked for a hug from a machine designed to look cute. Sweetie Belle's smile grew, and she reared back, hooves outstretched. Stephanie chuckled slightly, her surprise from the request mostly gone, and began to slightly marvel once again about how crazy things were. Her arms wrapped gently around Sweetie's back, as though she wasn't exactly fragile. What made you want a hug? She asked, looking around absently while her machine hugged her back. Sweetie closed her eyes. Wow, Stephanie's warm. Wow. I don't know, she answered honestly. Just wanted one. Wow, Stephanie's warm? Does that mean that she had It might just be heat sensors on Sweetie's body, but I think that she's actually starting to gain a sense of touch. But like I said, it could also just be sensors. Anyway, Stephanie let out a bit of quiet, nervous laughter again. Fair enough. She was about to pull away, since her machine seemed to be squeezing tighter rather than letting go. And who knew how long a robot would want a hug for? But she stopped. Her eyes settled on a flashing red light on the back of Sweetie's processing unit, all the way back near her rump casing. That is just above her rear leg's motors. Oh my gosh! Sweetie, oh my gosh, Sweetie murmured in understanding. Your secondary processor is offline, Sweetie. Hmm? Sweetie Belle felt Stephanie pushing away slightly and released her grip with reluctance. Rather than make her compliment over the shortness of the embrace, Rather than make her complaint over the shortness of the embrace, she addressed the new topic with interest. My what? She asked appropriately. Stephanie Crouch walked quickly around Sweetie Belle, finally seeing and recognizing something that she actually understood. Your secondary processor, it's an important part of you. If it's offline, then she trailed off, not really sure what that meant. All else in consideration. Well, normally it helps you make sure that you're functioning properly. Sweetie Belle pulled her head back in surprise, then whirled around to look down at her back. Oh, that sounds important, she admitted, and followed Stephanie's gaze into the open space on her rear. Astoundingly, there were all kinds of interesting gizmos inside of her. Wow, look at 'em, she thought, and at the same time, offline, meaning not functioning, inactive? Should we turn it back on? Stephanie Stephanie looked up, humming. Absolutely. You, well, previously, you could turn it off during periods of low power. It basically helped increase how much you could compute in times of high activity. After hesitating only a moment, she began taking apart the plating on Stephanie's left hip, exposing the blinking red light. I added it a couple years ago to help out. It's the newest part of you. Sweetie tilted her head, watching Stephanie with interest. New is good? Or in this case, newest? Head still tilted, she looked at her own blinking light again. Stephanie hummed and nodded absently. Yeah, it is. A frown worked its way into existence as she stared at the offending processor. Sweetie Belle looked up and was surprised by Stephanie's sudden lack of excitement. Hey, what's wrong? I thought you were happy just a second ago because you figured something out about me. Well, figure something about me out. Did you pinch your finger again? I said I was sorry about that. Stephanie looked up, grinning again, as if she had a switch of her own flipped. No, sweetie. No, I didn't pinch myself again. I just don't really know what to do. Sweetie stared a moment, then her eyelids tilted to give the impression of intense thought. Staring back firmly. What do you mean? You're super smart. about computers and things. No one else around seems to know much of anything either. And that makes you the smartest one here." Stephanie raised an eyebrow, smirking. "Oh, really?" Stephanie nodded once. Sorry. Sweetie Belle nodded once in confidence, eyes shut and smiling. "Yep." Stephanie made a bright laugh. Then, looking down again, she took in a considering breath. "Well, either way, here's the gist, sweetie. Sweetie's, Sweetie Belle's eyes word likely refocusing. I'm still not sure about this. I've pretty much ruled out that you're just malfunctioning. I'm kind of hesitant to do anything to you now, sweetie." Stephanie tapped a finger on her leg apprehensively, thinking. "Like when you didn't want to plug Mr. Laptop into me?" Sweetie Belle turned her ears back in mild shame, remembering how Mr. Laptop had stopped working after a while. "I'm really sorry that he—" Stephanie rolled her eyes and patted Sweetie's head. Anything to stop the never-ending apologies. "It's fine, really. I wouldn't have plugged it in if I wasn't comfortable with it breaking. Just like I wouldn't have plugged that laptop into you if I wasn't pretty sure it would be safe or not hurt you. Also, the laptop is a thing, not a mister." While listening, Sweetie Belle blinked and leaned into Stephanie's hand slightly, then made an interested sound at what she said. The ideas that Stephanie had about her and everything else were interesting. Point in fact, anything that explained the world or something in it was interesting, but especially stuff about herself. Apparently, plugging into and talking with the bossy computer, Hal, had caused problems, but talking to Stephanie's other simpler electronics had been more all right, like the music machine. So, Sweetie Belle worked out what Stephanie was trying to say for herself. "You think turning my other processor on might be bad?" Stephanie began to stare in doubt at Sweetie's hindquarters again. "Exactly. I mean, She floundered a bit, still not sure how exactly to talk with something about the possibility of it being alive. So far, she just winged it. "I'm not really sure how delicate you are, or what it could be, sweetie. I don't really know anything for—" "Turn it on," Sweetie chirped. Her cameras, or eyes as she called them, focused and unfocused on her extra processor. "I mean, we don't know if we don't. If something like what happened with Hal happens again, we know I'll be fine in the end." Stephanie furrowed her brow, and looked up. She realized the look after Sweetie looked up as well. "Are you sure? Didn't you say before it hurt you?" Sweetie Belle frowned slightly, humming, then processed to smile and nod her head. "Yep, he did, but I got better." Stephanie raised an eyebrow. "I see," she murmured doubtfully. Sweetie Belle sighed, a near-perfect imitation of what Stephanie would. "Come on! If that thing's supposed to help me think, it's not doing its job right now. Is it? She giggled and shifted about slightly on her hooves. Well, come on, Steph. Hop to it. Stephanie made an indignant sounding humph and folded her arms briefly. All right, you win. Right away, princess. Laughing slightly and convinced, she made her way around to Sweetie's panel of switches. Among them was a little rubber reset button, barely more than a bump, but clearly marked as the one she wanted to push for a manual reset. Here we go. Ready? Sweetie nodded her head. Sweetie nodded, her head craned around. Ready, she chirped. Stephanie activated the second processor. A little surprisingly, the red blinking light turned into a cheerfully bright green one. There, she exclaimed, then sat up, dusting her hands. Something finally went my way. Chuckling, she she turned her grin up towards Sweetie. Well, all well, our way, I guess I should say. Right, Sweetie? Stephanie reached up on her and gave Sweetie's neck a good few pats of appreciation. Oddly, Sweetie Belle's expression seemed a little flat, and saying that about a machine's face was saying a lot. The last few days she hadn't stayed still for very long, so the lack of an immediate response was odd. Sweetie? Stephanie tried again. When she didn't respond, she put a hand down on the ground and leaned in close. Sweetie, are you in there? Suddenly, Sweetie blinked once and said something. Uh-oh. A flash of violet light flickered around her eyes briefly. Steph? She asked plainly, just before her voice deformed into something vaguely resemblant of an old dial tone. Stephanie donned a look of dread, then gasped and sat down as Sweetie's left eyelid started twitching, and an ear-wrenched croak of static burst out of her speaker. Suddenly the little filly-bot was alive with motion, ears spinning around and tail going berserk. Stephanie stayed still out of pure shock as things went from an obvious bad to worse. Sweetie Belle's legs slid out slightly in front of her, and her legs began shaking, followed closely by the rest of her. Sweetie! Stephanie cried out, then covered her mouth with a hand, at a loss as to what she should do. Purple sparks flew out of her old machine from the open compartment, eyes and everything else skittering and spraying across the floor. Stephanie watched them fly in various corners of the room and managed a quick thought in response. Crap. Well, everybody, that was Chapter 9. The next chapter will be Chapter 10. And hopefully I'll be able to get that recorded because my computer is not glitching out right now, so I'm taking advantage of it. Well, see you guys next chapter. Live long and brony on. Nocturnal Night out.